So we will proceed. So I'm John Puntis. I represent Doctors in Unite on the steering group of End Social Care Disgrace, and I chair the End Social Care Disgrace Trade Unionist Committee. As you know, I hope this meeting has been organised by End Social Care Disgrace. This is a campaign that calls for the setting up of a freestanding national care support and independent living service, which is funded through government investment and progressive taxation, which is free at the point of use. It's publicly provided and accountable and nationally mandated, but locally provided. We want care to be radically reimagined and co-produced with disabled people, carers, and sector workers, as well as local communities. And we think it should offer choice, control, dignity, and independence. It would provide a range of practical and financial support to carers and would value the expertise of carers. And it would ensure that staff pay and conditions reflect their high value and skills. And you can find out more about End Social Care Disgrace on its website. Now, as government plans to cut benefits, herd people into work, ignore deteriorating population health, scrap the winter fuel allowance for older people, and postpone action on social care until after 2028, we need to join together and make a lot of noise, or a mighty roar, as Gilda likes to say. And we have to draw attention to the current injustices and raise the torch for radically reimagining care, support, and independent living. And we hope that this meeting will be part of that mighty roar. We have three excellent speakers, all very experienced, who I'll introduce in turn, and we're very pleased to have them all. They're going to speak over what I hope will be just the first part of the meeting, and the second half will then be open for questions and contributions from the floor, which we're very keen to hear, so that you can share your experience and ideas and help us formulate action plans. The meeting, as you know already, I think, is being recorded, and so will be available to people who haven't been able to join online. And we're not going to have the chat open for the first part of the meeting, so it doesn't distract people. So what I'd like to do now is to introduce our first speaker, who is Jan Shortt. We'll then have Rachael Tomlinson, followed by Simon Duffy. But Jan Shortt will be known to many people on this call. She's General Secretary of the National Pensioners Convention. The NPC's main objective, just to remind you, is to promote the welfare and interests of all pensioners as a way of securing dignity, respect, and security in retirement. And Jan brings a wealth of campaigning experience to this meeting. And Jan, I would like to invite you to talk now. I would like you to talk for up to 7 minutes, and I hope you won't mind if I just interrupt you at 6 minutes to let you know.
No, that'll be absolutely fine. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks very much. So it's over to you, Jan.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for inviting me. As John said, I'm General Secretary of the National Pensions Convention, and we don't just stand up for the pensioners of today, it's about the pensioners of tomorrow too, because we were workers once and they will be pensioners in the future. So what we gain or lose now, they gain or lose. And we have a policy of our National Care Service free at the point of use, but we do support the KONP with independent living is a must in terms of disability. And it has the same policies as you have, which is around making sure that care workers are properly paid, they have a proper contract, they have proper conditions of service, and they have proper training. Now, in terms of what's happening in the cost of living crisis and the crisis in the NHS, people not being able to get appointments with their GP, we've seen the increase in corridor care, and we are absolutely appalled at the fact that that seems to be now accepted as the norm, with one hospital actually employing a doctor to solely look after patients waiting in the corridor for their care. And that speaks of, potentially looking at that as a normal thing now, rather than something to be seen to and funded and better looked at. So in terms of what we might be expecting in the spending review, we expect cuts, of course. That is not beyond the realm of, we've seen it already in the press. And I have to say, the MPC is not totally in love yet with the Labour Party, but we hope for better. But if you are looking at growing your economy, what you don't do is cut people's income. People's income actually enables them to grow the economy. If you've got money after you've paid your bills, then you can choose what to do with it. And if you choose to go to a local town or somewhere else, you're paying into that local economy. But if you take away, some of people's income, then that is disabling them in many, many ways and excluding them from, social gatherings or doing something that they really feel is nice. And we all know that your mental, physical and emotional health is much better if you can get out and see friends and do things that you like doing, like going to a cinema or to a show or something like that. So we expect cuts in the budget. The winter fuel payment hit older people really, really hard. It's also hit those on low incomes. And we haven't given up our fight to get it reinstated. It's going to be a long fight, because they would want to say to us, well, we're taking away people's welfare from sickness. You do not play one set of a generation and a society against each other. Your government should be for everyone. Government should be looking at everybody's possibilities and looking at how you can grow people. And the way you grow people and grow the economy is invest. And you invest in public services like the NHS, like local government public services. And kicking social care down into 2028 will not help. It will not help the NHS, and it certainly will not grow the economy, and it certainly won't help anyone who needs care. So you're right, John. We have to work together, and we have to keep campaigning, and we have to make a noise, a big noise. We've just today circulated your event outside. You're going to have outside. Is it Conway House? You're going to have with West Streeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fact that West Streeting has already said that he believes that the answer to social care in the NHS is more privatisation needs really strong voices. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to get people there, John, and hopefully that there will be a noise and it will make a difference. We've already asked to meet with the Health and Social Care Select Committee because of our policies and an understanding around the damage that is being done to the NHS and in turn to social care. They are reliant on each other. If there is no social care, nobody can leave hospital with safety. So yes, I totally agree, John, and I hope today is the start of that, and we will support you wherever we can, because the NHS belongs to us, doesn't belong to anyone else. And we are looking at reinstating the vision that Bevan had when he created the NHS, which is a service for everybody, cradle to the grave, free at the point of need. So we're with you, and thank you for the invitation. One thing that we are really pushing now is for a commissioner for older people. Everybody that we've sent submissions to have said that a commissioner for older people and ageing in England is a must. We're not sure they want what we want, which is an independent commissioner backed by legislation to protect older people. On the 17th of April, the second anniversary of our campaign launch, we will be working with our partners, Independent Age, Ageing Better and Age UK, and there will be an event of some kind. And, obviously we will be inviting our other partners as well. It's likely to be something in House of Commons, but we want to make sure that when they start talking about a commissioner for older people, it's the real thing. And we've been advised by the commissioners in Wales and Northern Ireland that legislation is a must. They're finding the fact that legislation doesn't back them up to a certain extent quite a difficult thing. So, and again, obviously, pensioner poverty, three main areas of our policy for this year. So a lot of work to do, a lot of campaigning to do. And like I say, we're not completely in love with Labour at the moment, but we'll give them a chance to improve. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan, and perfect timing. So many thanks for that as well. Okay, our next speaker, Rachael. I'm delighted to welcome Rachael Tomlinson. Again, many of you, I think, will know Rachael because she's a prominent disabled activist, an advocate, and also a family carer. And she campaigns with End Social Care, Disgrace, and with Disabled People Against Cuts. And you'll know her for her many trenchant contributions to social media. So, Rachael, the next 7 minutes is yours.
I'll try my best. Good evening, everyone. My name's Rachael, and I sit before you today as a disabled person, a carer, an advocate, chair of the ESCaD Publicity Group and DPAC Sheffield. As a witness to the cruel and relentless attacks on disabled people and the support we have relied on for 14 years, we've seen cuts, policy changing, and media narratives that paint us as burdens rather than as human beings with rights. My inboxes have been particularly full this week. Let's be clear, this is not just a financial issue. These attacks on benefits and services are an attack on our very dignity, our independence, and our right to live full lives. Today, I want to talk about the reality disabled people and carers face, the deliberate erosion of our rights, and why we must stand together to fight back. For disabled people, benefits are not a luxury. They're a lifeline. They enable us to access mobility aids, pay for essential care, keep a roof over our head to a degree, and survive. Yet repeatedly, we are forced to justify our existence to the system that's designed to break us. And it's doing a lot of that at the moment. People are being denied disability benefits through cruel and inaccurate assessment processes, and now they want to change these even more. Many die waiting for appeals or are pushed into extreme poverty while fighting for what they are entitled to. I am sure everyone has heard of Jodie Whiting. Social care funding has been slashed, forcing people into isolation, unsafe living conditions, and institutionalisation against their will in some areas. We're constantly portrayed as scroungers and frauds, despite fraud rates for disability benefits being less than 1%. 1,180 pieces of rubbish across mainstream media last year, which obviously goes over more than one a day, attacking disabled people. Meanwhile, the real crisis, the failure of the government to support us, is ignored. Let's not forget carers also, though, the unpaid workforce holding society together. Many carers have been forced to give up jobs, their health, and even their futures to provide essential support with little recognition and even less financial help. £162 billion a year carers are saving the government. Carers' allowance is insultingly low, and the expectation that families will step in to provide care only shifts the burden from the government onto exhausted, under-supported individuals. These cuts and policies are not accidents. They're deliberate political choices made by governments that prioritise profits and tax cuts for the wealthy over the rights and dignity of disabled people. If you are like me, you are probably fed up to the back teeth of hearing about the previous government and what they've left us with. They are still making political choices over disabled people. Billions are found for corporate bailouts, yet disabled people are told there's no money. MPs vote for their pay rises while slashing personal independence payment and cutting vital services. The way that they're talking about PIP and how they're wanting to chop off mental health, which we all know is invariably has an underlying reason for. Energy prices soar while disabled people, many of whom rely on energy-intensive medical equipment, are forced to choose between heating and eating. Power chairs, oxygen tanks, all these things that cost more. We refuse to accept a future where disabled people are pushed into poverty, carers are overworked and unpaid, and those in power continue to ignore our voices. We demand a national care support and independent living service, fully funded, publicly provided, radically reimagined and free at the point of need. An end to cruel disability assessments, replace the broken system with a fair, transparent and medically led assessments designed to support, not punish. I support people every single day that have been through assessments that have not taken the slightest bit of notice of all their medical information they've got in front of them. It's horrific. Protection of disability benefits, no more cuts, no more means testing that strips people of essential support. Recognition and proper financial support for carers, because caring for a loved one should not mean living in poverty, and many, many carers do. An end to the demonisation of disabled people. We are not frauds, we are not burdens. We deserve the same rights, respect and opportunities as anyone else. And an end to charging for social care services, because that's the latest thing that I'm fighting at the moment. The time to fight back is now, even though we seem to have been fighting forever. They want us to be silent. They want us to accept these attacks without resistance, but we will not be silent. And anyone who knows me knows I will not be silent. Every time a disabled person speaks out, every time a carer demands better, every time we refuse to accept these injustices, we push back against a system that wants to erase us. I won't get into the subject of assisted dying at this moment in time. We must protest, write to MPs, challenge unfair policies, and refuse to be ignored. Because when we fight back together, we are stronger. And we need other people to keep fighting for us as well. We're asking for you to write to your MPs, to ask them to attend Portcullis House with the Disability Coalition on the 17th of March. We'll drop the details in the chat before the end of the meeting. And please also look out for updates from our lovely Gilda on the protests, which are hopefully going to be outside Parliament on the 26th of March and in other areas across the country, hopefully. We're not asking for favours, we are demanding our rights, and we will not stop until we get them. Hands off our disability benefits. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. They're a clarion call to arms, I think, and perfect timing. So once again, thank you very much for that. Now, our next speaker is Simon Duffy, and I hope he's going to tell us a little bit about radical reimagining of services. Simon, I'm very pleased, as we all are, that you're able to come and speak tonight. I'm going to give you 14 minutes because you've got a broader brief. And just for those who don't know you, Simon is Director of Citizen Network, which exists to connect individuals and groups around a vision of a world where everyone matters, and it seeks to encourage shared learning, action, and creativity. Simon's worked to advance social justice over many years now. He had a special interest, I think still has a special interest in deinstitutionalization, and was a pioneer in the field of community care. In 2003, he co-founded Control, a movement to transform the organisation of social care in England. And he's also co-founded the Centre for Welfare Reform, which has a focus on defending disabled people from the effects of austerity and welfare reform. Increasingly, his work has been around the value of cooperative action, peer support, and action at neighbourhood level. So he's an excellent person to talk at this meeting, and he's going to speak to us about thinking differently with both local and international insights. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thanks, John. That's a heck of an introduction. I don't think I deserve that, but anyway, it's nice to follow another Sheffielder. Hello, Rachel. So I'm based in Sheffield, and you know, I've got to say everything that Rachel says is spot on, and I have spent quite a lot of my life trying to provide evidence of the damage done to disabled people, the targeting of disabled people, the damage done by austerity. But that's not my brief for this thing. So I kind of like, I feel a bit uncomfortable with following Rachel's powerful statement, with trying to look about what this radical reimagining might be. And so I hope this is going to be useful and doesn't seem too odd, given the severity of the attacks that people are facing. And I thought I'd start with just like one simple statistic, though, that's a negative statistic, but I think it's worth bearing in mind with social care, because quite how the last set of governments and this government gets away with it, I do not know. But it's just worth thinking about social care funding as a percentage of GDP. As a percentage of GDP, in 2009, it was over 2% of GDP. It's now 1% of GDP. That means that it's basically been halved in real terms in a 15-year period. That is extraordinary, extraordinary, and it's extraordinary that it doesn't really get media attention, and that the kind of gloss and nonsense that we get from the media just doesn't grapple with the reality of that. I can't think of any other significant, you know, health services under attack, but nothing like that. Nothing like that. So I just wanted to make that point, because I think sometimes the fluff and nonsense that comes out of government disguises some of the basic facts about what's going on. I basically wanted to make two positive points, one fairly short, but about process, and then the second one about what we might be trying to build, which is probably going to be more contentious, and hopefully I'm quite happy to debate this with folks. But I want to talk a little bit about Australia to start with, the other side of the world. And I spent a bit of my life going backwards and forwards to Australia, sadly burning unnecessary carbon probably, but what takes me over to Australia is the radical reforms that they introduced in Australia in 2013, under the banner of Every Australian Counts, was the campaign that created these reforms. And then the reforms themselves are called the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And I'm a bit schizophrenic about this because actually the details of the scheme I'm rather critical of. I think it's very bureaucratic and hasn't really lived up to the demands of disabled people. So it's always an important thing to remember, careful what you wish for sometimes, because when you put ideas in the hands of bureaucrats, they sometimes turn into something very different. But despite the problems, the statistics are interesting. The spending on roughly social care, it's a bit different. It actually excludes older people with disabilities, but includes children. So it's kind of a bit off. It doesn't perfectly correlate with adult social care. But spending on that funding stream has gone up by 400% in that same period. Why is that? Well, one indication of this is that when I go to Australia, the media are interested in social care. Why is that? Like I turn up, just some bloke from Britain, and you'll get on the mainstream news, you'll be on the front of a newspaper, because these are political issues. Why did that happen? It's the Every Australian Counts campaign that made that happen. And what was interesting about that campaign is, I think, two things that we need to think about in the future. One is the name, Every Australian Counts. What they did was they got people thinking that disability is a part of everyday life, that anybody can experience disability, anybody can have a child with a disability, anybody can have an accident. They got people thinking about disability and the right to adequate support as a disabled person on a universal basis. And that was, I think, very, very important, because it got into the heads of Australians who weren't really thinking about disability on a day-to-day basis. But the other thing that was really important was that they managed to pull off something which I don't think we've pulled off yet, which was they really managed to bring together, and I'm not saying this is without complexity and challenge, but they brought together disabled people front and centre, but with the service providers and with family and carer organisations. And they built a vision with those three kind of pillars underneath it. Now, many people might think that's impossible and difficult, or that one side might corrupt the other side, or that disabled people might be undermined by providers, etc. And all those risks are probably true. But I do think there's something worth thinking about. I saw there was a big campaign the other day, wasn't it, by called Providers Unite. And I put some slightly sarcastic comments into, like, this is campaigning today, commenting on these things on social media, isn't it? But Providers Unite is not a good way of campaigning to protect social care. Even the language, who cares about providers? What the hell is that to ordinary people? It doesn't cut through. It doesn't mean anything. And so I think unity is important, but unity for what purpose, and unity including who, is important. But we do need to think about these things, because if you are going to cut through to the media and to mainstream politicians, you do need to present a kind of united front. And I would say that Australia's proven that. So maybe there's a way through, and it'll show me I'm wrong. But as far as I can see, that's the most effective campaign for disability rights that we've seen in the world in the last 50 years. So if somebody can show me a better one, that's great. Let's learn from that. But that's the most effective one. So anyway, that's the thing about process. So I think it is a positive, if challenging, thing. What are we aiming at? Well, how long have I got, John, by the way, now, before I waffle on and on?
You've got at least 7 more minutes.
Okay, right. Well, that's kind of like the halfway.
There's a little bit of flexibility, of course. So
I don't want to abuse the time. So you control me. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you 2 little stories to kind of provide a setting for this, because I can waffle on about it a little bit. And you mentioned that a large part of my life was John creating this concept of personal budgets, which kind of followed on from direct payments, to some extent opened up direct payments and many other reforms to a wider group of people than before, fraught with challenges as these things are. But in 2009, having set up an organisation called In Control, I found myself kind of out on my ear a little bit. It's a bit of a habit of mine. I was too frank about how shit I thought the social care system was. I kind of fell out with the Director General of Social Care, and I was kind of manoeuvred out of the organisation I'd set up. So I have a track record for not being very diplomatic. And I found myself actually not really able to earn a living in social care. I was kind of picked up by Women's Centre in Halifax, and I wrote a book with the wonderful Claire Hyde, who sadly died last year. Amazing woman. And one of the things that really taught me was the power of peer support, like women sticking up for other women, women coming alongside other women, women in community organising things differently. And then a few months later, I got a contact from an amazing group in Doncaster called People Focus Group Doncaster. That was a group of people with mental health problems, facilitated by another wonderful woman, Kelly Hicks. And they've brought together 3,500 people in Doncaster in a peer support network over the last 15 years. And a lot of my work has been really inspired by what they've achieved. And measuring the social value of that has been one of the things that I've done. I've been involved in different campaigns to stick up for social care. And one of the things we did a few years ago was actually when Brian Fisher was chair of the Socialist Health Association, we set up the Yorkshire branch of the Socialist Health Association. And we had a meeting in Friends Meeting House in Sheffield. And that was one of these meetings that just felt very strange, because often when I was talking about the paper that, and Thor Gordon was on this, that Gordon Peters and I wrote about funding for social care. So we're talking about funding for social care in Sheffield, and we had family members there, we had disabled people there, we had social workers there, we had kind of random socialists there. And I just asked this question, like, what's our image of social care at a neighbourhood level? And the strange thing was, actually, everybody started agreeing. Everybody started agreeing with, and those groups don't always agree, that, you know, what we really needed was community. We needed people having accessible communities. We needed people with disabilities in control of their own lives, but also people at a neighbourhood level coming together to make those neighbourhoods really work better for everybody, but particularly led by disabled people. Social workers wanted to be working back at a neighbourhood level, not stuck in an office in the centre of town. Nurses wanted that. Carers wanted that. So that's a lot of my work in the last few years has been really exploring what would a kind of genuine neighbourhood approach look like. Because I think that, you know, I like Rachael said, I believe still in people's fundamental rights to have personal budgets, resources that they control, and other benefits that lift people out of poverty. And in fact, I make the case for basic income plus, so that everybody should be lifted out of poverty, and people who need extra assistance should also get that extra assistance. But, you know, what we want is to live lives of real citizenship. We want to be part of the community, not passively, not accepted, but actually active contributors to community. And this is true for all of us at every age. It's true for children, it's true for adults, it's true for older people. We all want that community that where we can be recognized as somebody who's got value. And we've lost that. We really have lost that. We've lost a lot of our social service systems have floated away like giant spaceships above the communities that they're part of. Rachael might have come across this work we've done recently to map the neighbourhoods of Sheffield. The reason we had to map the neighbourhoods of Sheffield, and everybody in Sheffield knows that they live in not just Sheffield, but a neighbourhood of Sheffield. But the council had no map of the neighbourhoods, didn't validate those neighbourhoods, and certainly didn't organise services on a neighbourhood basis. Yet when you go to Iceland, Iceland's a population half the size of Sheffield, 250,000. It's got 78 municipalities. That's basically the same as one of Sheffield's neighbourhoods. Health, social care and education are all devolved to that level. And so, I mean, I'm going to end with this point, I think, really. One of the challenges we face, and if you're listening to Rachael and Jan talk, we're a lot of the time shouting at Westminster, aren't we? Because they've taken so much power out of our lives. But one of the radical reimaginings we have to do is actually to imagine a world where that power isn't all in Westminster. It isn't all about Westminster doing the right thing. It's mostly about Westminster letting us do our thing. There's no chance in hell that Westminster gives a toss about Sheffield or South Yorkshire or about the neighbourhoods. They don't know them. They don't know them. They don't care about them. Give us our power back. Yeah, give us good social structures, and they can be national systems, but give us the power to make those systems work at a neighbourhood level and make those systems accountable to us. A national health service needs to be accountable to the local people, not just through Wes Streeting, but on every street. We should be able to ask, how's this system working for us? Because I don't see any of that at the moment. So I think our politics needs to not just be about the money, but it also needs to be about power and where that power sits. And that's part of reimagining, I think, social care. And I think social workers, disabled people and families want a different vision for social care, one that's radically more empowering for people, but radically more local as well. Thanks, John. Did I make my target? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely spot on, Simon. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for a fascinating talk, giving us some important things to think about and perhaps discuss in the rest of the meeting. So at this point, just let me thank all three speakers once again for really good talks and getting the meeting off to such an excellent start. If you have other commitments and you don't want to stay to the end of the meeting, that of course is fine, but you're very welcome to stay. And we're now going to open it up for comments and discussion. I would ask people to keep their contributions concise if they don't mind. And I'm also going to start off by putting Anne Gray on the spot and asking Anne if she would like to say anything about the Equal Care Co-op, which I know she's involved with.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not literally involved with it. It merited a lot of inspiration and a page or two in a book I've just written, because I think it's a very great model of how social care could embody many of the principles that Rachael and Simon have talked about tonight. The unity of volunteers, carers, and people who need care, and the idea that all this comes from an active community with a lot of mutual aid going on, and a lot of very active community organisations to act as kind of bases and anchors for a cooperative institution providing care, which is what Equal Care is. It has a substantial enterprise now developed in the Halifax area, and which is not too far from Sheffield. So maybe those in the north particularly could have a look at it and maybe talk to some of the people and visit it. They did try to form a base in London, which was rather less successful. And the obstacles there were partly to do with delays in getting personal budgets. I think delays in assessment and getting personal budgets are one of the main obstacles to real person-centred care, which needs to be looked at. So that's all I really wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that, Anna. That's good to hear from you. Okay, so if people could put their hands up if they would like to speak, please. That means clicking on the react button at the bottom of your screen and then clicking on raise hand. And then I can see you. So I have Anna Rose. Anna, hello.
Hi, thank you. That was terrific. That was a really clear and useful summary. It's made me feel I know a lot more about what ESCaD is about. I've been with it for a while, and the words I keep hearing, which is great. But tonight has given me a real insight into what's behind the words that we all say. So thank you very much to the three speakers. I think what occurred to me, which is beyond the scope of this meeting, is how what you're saying actually applies to just about everything that's wrong with our country at the moment. That you could apply it to everyone who's struggling. And I think that's interesting and useful, but to be put on the shelf for now for this meeting. But I really appreciated, particularly the scheme given by Simon. I think thinking about process and the what is a very, very useful way of organizing. And I like the fact that you had some statistics. I think statistics can be a nightmare, but they can be very, very helpful. When you said we've halved social care funding in the last X years, however many it is, 14, 15, 16, whatever it amounts to, I kind of thought that absolutely explains so much of what each of us has witnessed. But we could use that. This is a usable tool. How can you expect? The other useful statistic to go with that would be interesting would be whether the statistics of the number of people requiring some form of social care has stayed static or has gone up or down at the same time. So they would be a very useful pair. But I think getting very specific in the way that tonight's speakers have been in our campaigning is really necessary, because we need to be punchy. We need to get over things where people are suddenly, ordinary people who may not have had the experience. I think that's one of the main things I feel and have taken from tonight. We need to find a way to reach ordinary people. And I'm absolutely in awe of what Australia did. Whatever the goods and bads, whatever the anything else, they did something remarkable. And it's, I think, what we probably want to be doing, need to be doing. So, and it sounds as though they were incredibly organised and got media behind them. God knows how you do that in this country. But the fact that we need to, I think, is absolutely central. I'll stop there because there's lots of ideas bubbling up. But thanks very much to the three people.
Thank you very much, Anna. I can't see, yes, I can see other hands up. So I've got Jed Tolty, if I have pronounced your name correctly. Jed.
Yeah, you have pronounced it correctly, and I'm somebody who's quite passionate about keep our NHS public. In the same way, I'm quite passionate about keeping much of our social care public. Social care provision. And I come at this because I'm a social worker for some 20 years, having worked with older adults. So often I oversee hospital discharges, and I do take the view that you can't fix the NHS without fixing social care, because the two increasingly are linked. And the good thing now is that there was a time perhaps when medical practitioners purely looked at people in terms of a medical perspective, whereas in social work and social care we looked at the social model of disability, etc. And I think in time I've seen a great change come over in terms of medical practitioners now seeing people in the community in a much less medical way, and in a more holistic, and embracing the social model of care and support. Now, I just want to say, I agree with everything so far. There's no problem with that, and some good points that was interesting about Australia. But my view is, and I've come to this meeting today because as somebody, socialist and ex-member of the Labour Party now, sadly, I am, and it was disappointing that Labour have kicked the can down the road in terms of the social care reform, when really it is a here and now issue, and those of us who work in it see it on a daily basis. And my field is older adults. And I know some of the issues that embrace older adults about care and support in the community, or if you like, provision, is increasingly privatised. We have carers, tendering, care agencies tendering to the local authority, paying minimum wages, and care providers, care homes, if you like, increasingly been swallowed up by big entities, including private equity funds, who are now manipulating the market and policing social care. And if you look for any local authority, the two pinch points in any of their budgets is particularly in adult social care and in children's social care. So I would really like to see us place a greater emphasis an additional emphasis on, bringing a lot of care and support that's now been privatised back into, local authority public control. I remember the days when we did make provision for people in the community, or even in residential care for older people, where the standards were far, far higher. There was greater accountability. And now we're seeing, in comparison, well, me and my colleagues, we deal on a daily basis of, safeguarding concerns from about the poor level of care for elderly people, or for any, younger adults in residential settings. And similarly, dealing with safeguarding concerns about poor care from, care agencies private care agencies contracted to the local authority, 15 minutes calls, not leaving people for an hour and an hour sitting in their own mess. And this sort of, sadly, the whole market is just truly awful. And I do have to say to people, I've got some idea about what it's like being old and been completely at the mercy of others to depend on, meeting your essential tasks of daily living. And what I get exposed to is not nice. It's undignified quite often, and it's horrible. And that's only because, the starvation of funding, private companies who are just in it to extract as much money profit as they can get out of it. And I think, within comp, we ought to be talking much more about private, the public, owning of our much of our care provision, in the same way that we are in talking about defending the NHS from increased privatisation. So, I think that's perhaps missing from the conversation up to now. That's just my view. And, maybe somebody else would like to make a comment on that.
Okay, thanks, Jed. Well, that's certainly a key demand from End Social Care Disgrace. And just if there's any confusion, Keep Our NHS Public and End Social Care Disgrace are completely separate campaigns, with COMP covering the NHS and ESCaD covering in a complementary way issues to do with social care. COMP regards ESCaD rightly as a kind of sister organisation. I'm going to take Mike, then Gordon, then Marianne. So Mike Hope next.
Yeah, and thanks, Ged, for kind of mentioning and highlighting the need to bring services back in-house. I think, there's a long history of failed privatizations, whether it's in health or a whole range of other public services. I'm in Suffolk, where they have just outsourced all the so-called soft services of the main hospital in North East Essex, Colchester, and Ipswich Hospital, and they will live to rue the day. Interestingly, Suffolk County Council, still Tory dominated, but only just now, but traditionally always Tory, has just brought libraries back in-house because the charity that was running them ended up running them down. And so, you know, even the proponents of these systems kind of agree they, you know, in the end, they just don't work. They do not provide. But thanks also for mentioning the medical model, Ged, because somebody mentioned that the media is completely compromised in the chat. And of course it is primarily, but open democracy is always worth a look. And today, Open Democracy, one of their main headlines is that Starmer and Liz Kendall and government ministers not only fail to understand disability benefits, they misunderstand disability entirely, because they are completely hooked on this medical model, which is a problem there to be fixed for individuals, rather than looking at the social model, which is, you know, the way society disables anybody who is different and does not enable them to contribute. And it's made clear that several hundred million could be contributed to the economy by actually enabling disabled people to do the right kind of work in the right kind of way with the right kind of support. So, you know, I think we really, in the coming well, days and weeks and months, we're really going to have to push back against this. It is particularly disgusting that this is coming from a Labour government, half of whose MPs worked in voluntary organisations, you know, to get their leg up into Parliament, to now dump on the very people that they were working, allegedly working for in the past. So there's a level of cynicism there which even the Tories can't match. But there's one other thing I would ask people to read, or actually to listen to. I happened to hear last night, driving back from visiting a client elsewhere, the Moral Maze. Now we're familiar with the Moral Maze on Radio 4. They were talking about, is there a morality in cutting benefits? And I expected the usual right-wingers to come forth, but they didn't. Even Tim Montgomery, the erstwhile editor of Conservative Home, I think he's now joined Reform, nonetheless said he confessed to having had a major mental health crisis. Excuse me, I've got a cold. During the pandemic. And he said, I don't even understand what happened to me. How could I possibly expect anybody else to understand? How can these people assess these very complex issues? There is a huge legacy post-pandemic. I have a good friend who's got long COVID and is completely altered in her abilities, and cognitively and just in terms of fatigue and everything else. There are huge problems. But what ended up with regard to the Moral Maze was that everybody agreed that we have a welfare and benefit system and a social care system which is punitive and which is cruel and which is one of the worst in Europe. So, you know, that's something to build on. We have to push back. Rachael, thanks for your, you know, call to arms. That was particularly welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, it would be so nice to hear Labour saying it wanted to understand why we had more sick people, why population health was worse, and how that can be fixed. So I'm taking people in the order that their hands come up, and I'm sure I'll be able to get around to everyone. So it's Gordon now, then Marianne, and then I've got David's hand up. So Gordon.
Hi. Thank you. I want to pick up very briefly Simon's point on the power of the local. I think too much of the argument about this, the alternatives, is not here tonight, but generally is about it's either the state or the market. Now, people may have noticed earlier today, Keir Starmer announced the abolition of the NHS executive. You know, thousands and thousands of bureaucrats to be disappeared, right? So pretty radical, even in his terms. Where does that leave the NHS? Well, there's a huge huge problem of who's going to run it. And clearly the privatization is the terrible alternative, which we want to, I would say, avoid at all costs. That leaves it wide open now to that. And the Streeting not doing anything about social care in this Parliament at all until the next one. So I think what I'd want to offer is picking up Simon's point about the power of the local. Bad times like this give opportunities as well. And local democracy or citizens' networks and cooperative ways of working together, a third alternative to a purist state approach or a purist market approach, but cooperatives of people, citizens' networks, and all the work that can go into that, whether through things like equal care or others are doing, now becomes, I think, should be on the front foot of all our thinking. So it's really a plea to take further the power of the local, especially given Starmer's today announcement and the abolition of the whole bureaucracy within the NHS, which leaves it wide open to privatisation, along with what's already happened to social care, 90% privatised. We need to grow the alternatives now, if never as never before. So citizens' networks, cooperative ways of working together on the how we work together, how we do it. The process is going to be absolutely vital, and the kind of democratic organisations that we would like to see, which is in the 7 demands of ESCaD, but actually beginning to spell that out now with the practical world in front of us of the abolition of the bureaucracies that have been running our lives in NHS and social care. We have to now build what these local power structures look like. So it's a plea to spend an awful lot of time, not now, but in other meetings from now on, talking about what local, powerful, democratic networks can look like and where are the best examples, whether Iceland, Australia, New Zealand, and bits of the UK, in fact, up to the point of Wales. Some things I know about in Scotland, some little things in London. And I know ESCaD's going to have a good practice meeting later on this year. But I think local democracy now is a premium. That's it.
Thank you very much, Gordon. And that's a suggestion for the focus of a meeting that we might have in the future. And if there's any other suggestions from those on the call, please put those into the chat. But I'm going to ask Marianne now if she'd like to come in. Marianne.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Marianne. I'm here because due to the experiences of my elderly father, I've started 2 campaigns, one of which is about continuing health funding, which I know people here have mentioned the importance of the interaction between the NHS and social care. And I feel like maybe to some extent, continuing healthcare funding, in some ways it forms a bridge between those 2 sort of sectors. It's something that I only found out about really only 6 months or so ago. The story was that my father, he contracted COVID in hospital, is suffering extremely badly to this day with long COVID, needed a very high level of care when he came back from hospital, and that quickly depleted his savings. So I looked into continuing healthcare funding, and what I was truly shocked by is how few people know about this funding. I mean, I've spoken with people who've worked for the NHS for decades and they don't even know it exists. And having gone through the application process, albeit only once, just the amount of evidence that you have to, under the current system, that you have to supply, all of which, to my mind, is completely extraneous. It's a system that is overly bureaucratic. It's a system that fails the people who are the most vulnerable, who won't, say, have family members who can advocate for them potentially, or may not be well enough themselves to, do things like gather medical records, document, when they needed certain amounts of care, and all this time, the way that it's almost like you're disbelieved until you can prove something beyond reasonable doubt, which I got to say, given that, with my father's case, you know, he's got medical records, you know, there's plenty of evidence already there. It feels truly hurtful that somebody then who has never met him says, oh, this isn't enough, sorry, no. And I want to pick up on some points that people made about person-centered care, because I mean that key decision about my father's care was made, it wasn't even made by a nurse assessor who had never met him. She was the person who led the meeting. And then it was made by a panel. So it's not, you know, forget person-centered. This is so far removed from the person they can't be seen anymore. So I've started this campaign. One of the things I'm doing is working with my father's local MP, who's a Lib Dem. I'm not loyal to any particular party, but I do notice that the Lib Dems have sort of positioned themselves as the party of social health and social care. So I don't know, possibly there will be some more Lib Dems who are sympathetic to this cause. Work is currently being undertaken in Parliament, research into how much of the trust budgets that are allocated for this funding actually end up being spent on it. Because my thought is, and this is, I don't like doing this, but this is purely looking at it from a financial point of view. Surely the amount of money that trusts are having to spend on delayed discharge is more than if they spent it on getting a good funding package and getting people out of hospital and either to their own home or somewhere else safe where they could recover. And I've actually looked into the numbers, and what the NHS spent on CHC funding in 2022 to 2023, approximately 4.4 billion. Delayed discharges, when you include the indirect costs, 7 billion. So if they're going to be spending that money anyway, why not spend it on, you know, getting people out of hospital? Maybe some of these people, they will recover, and, you know, maybe this will bring down the cost, but far more importantly, improve people's lives.
Indeed, thank you very much for sharing your experience, and sorry to hear about what your dad's gone through. I mean, I don't know if you've looked at the ESCaD website, but you will find there's a document there which argues that social care is affordable, and of course makes that point that you've made, that it's hugely expensive to have people who are in hospital not because of medical need, but because of the absence of social and community support. So I'd like to ask David Simpson now to come in. David.
Hello,
Thank
good
you for
evening.
waiting patiently.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, just lower my hand. Oh, it's lowered. Yeah, so I work in social care. I've worked in social care for 25 years. And not much apart from how we do our job has really changed. But I'm really, I mean, I love my job, but I'm really fed up with how politicians use social care as some kind of political football. They're sort of not much interest in social care. I know the government wants to do something around the National Care Service, but disgracefully, they're kicking the can down the road on social care and leaving it for another 3 years by employing a quango that means the government's doing nothing on social care, but there's a lot of fanfare around the NHS. So, you know, their attitude towards the NHS and social care is that social care basically is a secondary in the NHS is important, when really both are on the same level because both complement each other. I'm also really fuming about the benefit cuts, because I work with 3 very clever, brilliant, autistic young people, young adults, and they all claim PIP, and they are going to be impacted by the changes, and also they claim universal credit, so they are going to see a reduction in their income. And you know, the social care changes are what's being proposed are just cruel, violent, and inhumane. And we need to really, you know, go after our MPs, especially MPs that vote for the changes in the near future. But the social care I want to see is a social care that is democratic, it's based in the commons, it's free, it's progressive, it's funded by progressive taxation, and you know, we take the market out, we end the privatization, because, for example, 98% of children's and learning disability homes are closed down because they're owned by private equity. And there's also waste as well by councils. CQC a couple of years ago did a report where about 500 million is wasted by paying providers that provide really poor living environments and really poor care packages. And all this really has to stop. And we also have to think of the migrant care workers who are being really exploited. So there's the issue of the culture of racism in social care, when actually migrant care workers are absolutely vital for what we do, because without them, there would not be a social care. So, you know, I'm really, really glad that there is people out there that want to start challenging this, but also to start reimagining social care, because this, you know, the social care as it is now is at, you know, national emergency point. It's not a crisis, it's national emergency. And it's just not fit for purpose. So we need to abolish it and have a reimagined and a radical social care. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, David. ESCaD is definitely the right place for you. And I'll probably say this again at the end, but we would like people to join ESCaD. We also have working groups, and people are very welcome to join in with those. So certainly the last two speakers might like to consider that, and we'd be very pleased to have you. But next up, I've got Brian Fisher. Brian?
Hi, thanks. Thanks to all the contributors. Fantastic meeting so far. I wanted Anne Gray to, I mean, I thought you rather tantalized us with the care co-op information, and I was hoping you could provide a bit more about it. It's hailed as really having very good outcomes for people, and I was wanting to know more really about what those outcomes might be and how it got formed, and anyway, a little bit more detail about the process. And I guess that links with what Esme's put in the chat about why one failed, and that Esme wanted to talk more about it, the possibility of starting something up in Southwark. So a bit more on the care co-op, please, would be most welcome.
Thank you. Do you want me to say something now?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Right. What I know about the Equal Care Co-op is that it became established in the Calderdale area, and it is a workers' cooperative, but it's also a cooperative which is not just for workers, because the clients, if one can call them that, the people who are provided with care, are also members. And so it begins to bring together this kind of community that Simon was talking about, but it also rests very much on the idea of a community existing out there in the wider society, in the sense that there is a connection deliberately built up between the care workers, who are self-employed mainly, and the users of their services, and the family carers, and the wider community, who are often volunteers as well. So it's democratic because it brings together the people who are getting care and the workers who support them, both together as members of the co-op. And it attempts to squeeze out profit, because the workers are not subjected to any kind of profit extraction by shareholders or holding companies or anything like that. It does rely heavily on the council being able to provide personal budgets to the users of services, which is one of the main obstacles about, getting things in a timely way. It also relies to some extent on the wider community for referrals, for making itself known, for having a physical base to do that in, and for recruitment of volunteers. So, I mean, I think it's a kind of flagship project. I won't say it's the only flagship project because there are several other, excuse me, there are several other care providing cooperatives in existence. And there's also a very interesting movement in micro enterprise care, which has been supported by a large number of councils, bringing together very small enterprises or even single individuals who, again, provide care without any shareholder takeaway. And this often works very well, particularly with younger people in need of support for leisure activities or for exercise or for escorting to places and things like that. So I think, Equal Care Co-op is a flagship project and one of a range of possibilities for the kind of non-profit arrangements for provision of care, which Gordon was advocating quite rightly as an alternative to these private agencies, which are, all the time competing for lower and lower prices being offered by local authorities, which is another problem that Equal Care Co-op faced, because the equation between the wages that people need to live on and the prices that the councils can pay as a result of their being totally deprived of money by central government, that, meets a real obstacle in the London area. So yeah, I think that's probably enough for me, but thank you.
Thanks very much, Dan. I think you've written about the Equal Care Co-op, haven't you? Is that right? And if so, maybe you could put a
I'll put the name of the book in the chat. Yeah, thank you.
Please do. Yes, thank you. Anna.
It's just a quick point, which was I was reminded when Marianne was speaking. I think it's incredibly important that we remember that in everything we do, that there are disabled people and all those involved with them who can speak up. But I think we need to hold on and always have in mind there are a number who cannot speak up for themselves. And they're often the group that are the most neglected, the least looked out for, the easiest to do down. So it's just a plea that we actually bear in mind that, this can include whole families who are just too overwhelmed to speak up for themselves. It can include people who don't have a voice, literally don't have a voice. But if we could always have in mind, there are those who can speak up given a platform, and there are those who cannot, and we must keep them in mind because they're a very important group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that important point. Gay.
Thanks very much. I'm a member of Keep Our NHS Public, particularly in Lambeth. And I'm just also very interested, but not terribly involved, sadly, with ESCaD. But I went to a meeting at the House of Commons that ESCaD held in November, and there was some talk there about the costs, because I think a lot of these ideas are great, but they obviously need people to, or money, I should say, to implement them. And the arguments about the costs of what's going on now in comparison to how much money would actually be needed to, to improve things, that was mentioned at the meeting in November. And I wondered about whether ESCaD had any success in lobbying the social care minister just to talk about these things. And I know it's really difficult at the moment in the current climate where money is just being cut left, right and centre, and short-termism is the name of the game. But has anybody any further information about the lobbying of politicians, about the complete waste of money we've got at the moment in terms of what we could be doing in social care and saving money in the long run. Thanks.
Well, Gilda might want to come in on that. We've certainly been trying to meet politicians. They haven't been exactly falling over themselves to talk, but we have been trying. So, Gilda, would you like to comment?
Yeah, Brian's probably better at talking about that than me. But right. I mean, we are struggling to talk to people, and we were just saying in one of our working group meetings that you know, the people who are listening to us are pretty scared at the moment. They're only a hair's breadth from being pushed out of the party, which is one of the issues for a number of people in Labour. And we do have, and I know gays in the Green Party, very good allies in the Green Party whose policy is not that far from ESCaD's, but again, they're quite small. So we're continually trying to meet with politicians or small groups of politicians, but it's heavy going against the whole kind of neoliberal agenda. And really, that's the point I wanted to make, just listening to what people are talking, again, with all this NHS kerfuffle, you know, about working people. I really think we have to keep having a go at the Labour Party over talking about we're for working people and that very narrow definition of work. And I've said it before, which kind of means that all people like myself who are retired, who do all sorts of campaigning and volunteering, God knows what, and many people do lots of personal caring, that is discounted as work because it doesn't make a profit for somebody else. And I do think we have to take that head on and not let Labour keep getting away with it, because it's very much linked to the very narrow definition of growth. You know, growth being, again, accumulating massive profits rather than making a healthier society where we all have better well-being, we look after each other, and we have a human-shaped society. So I do think we need to tackle that. And I think, and also the divide and rule, which Jan mentioned, because very much linked to this working people, is they are implicitly encouraging the discounting of older people and disabled people, maybe not deliberately, but this is how it goes. And so that it is encouraging this, it's the migrants are to blame, it's disabled people are to blame, it's older people are to blame. And I think we just have to be very strident in coming back at the concepts underlying. So not just fighting the cuts and resisting what's happening and looking at reimagining, but coming back on these ideas and taking them apart and saying we won't let you get away with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Gilda. And the sad thing is, with the cuts in benefits to disabled people, it's going to make it even less likely for them to find employment. Brian, before Marion's got her hand up, but Brian, you've been very involved with contacting politicians and trying to engage them. So would you like to say anything about that?
Yes. I mean, it's been impossible to get hold of Stephen Kinnock, who is the relevant minister at the moment, and there are other groups that have tried to meet him, other sort of left-wing groups that have tried to meet him and also failed. So I'm pretty sure we've tried in many different ways, and I'm pretty sure he's actually specifically avoiding groups like ours, but we will continue to try. On the other hand, we've had fantastic support from John McDonnell, who is a very inspiring and very committed to changes in social care. We've had good links with the Green Party, and we're going to continue talking to them because their policies are very similar to ours. The sort of useful, I mean, the gap that we have, and if there's anybody on the call who could help, it would be wonderful, is to talk to the Lib Dems. They are very committed to social care as a campaigning topic, even if they're not on the same page as us necessarily, but they're still very sympathetic. But we've had no success at all really in meeting them. So if there are people here who are in a Lib Dem constituency or who do have links with the Lib Dems, we would be very keen to hear from you and work with you on trying to make contact.
Thanks, Brian. And of course, Gay will know that at the meeting she went to, Lord Prem Seeker did come along. He's supportive, and he's also written about how paying for social care is a political choice and it is affordable. That's just reminded me again that our working groups, we have one that's called the Politicians Group, which is about building links with politicians, a trade union group and a publicity group, as well as the activist groups meeting. If anyone is interested in being involved, please let us know. And then Marianne, you want to come back in?
Can I just say, under carers group, very
And a
important.
carers group as well.
And
Lots
you
of
don't
groups.
have to be a member of ESCaD. You're all supporters. We're all supporters. There's no fee to be a member. And the doors to all the working groups are wide open. Just ask for the Zoom and you can come along.
Okay, thanks, Gilda. Marianne.
I have two things. One of them is I was just going to ask about what's the best way to join these working groups. Sorry, I'm really new to this, so I'm just trying to figure out the best way.
I think Gilda will let you know by email.
I'll send around some notes of the meeting. I can also put my own email in the chat. All we have to do is send you the Zoom links. You don't have to register for the working groups. You just turn up and crack on. And they basically run the organization. We don't have any mysterious ghost in the machine steering. We have a steering group, but it's open as well. So at the moment, so we're a very flat organization, very grassroots. And
Okay.
very poor.
I think everyone's registered. We have email addresses and you will be sent a note meeting. Let's crack on now.
Sorry, I do have one other just very brief
sorry,
thing.
Marianne, I beg your pardon. Yes.
I do have some kind of link to a Lib Dem MP because the MP that I'm working with on the CHC campaign, he's a Lib Dem. And he's been very supportive of my father's case. Obviously, I can't promise anything, but if I was to take something to him, I'd be more than happy to do that. And I think he's very keen to resolve these issues. So yeah, possibly.
Well, definitely. I think any MP that we can identify as having an interest in these issues, we would want to make contact with.
Thank you, Marianne. That's really helpful. We will be in touch.
Oh, yeah, please do.
So we've got 6 minutes left and there are two people who'd like to speak. So that's fine. And Rachel.
I just wanted to add to this workers narrative that is really the effect it has on disabled people to constantly hear this workers narrative saying that everybody should be working and we're going to help people disabled people into working. And I just kind of wanted to add a little bit to this in the fact that I actually personally applied for access to work as a self-employed person, and I jumped right to the front of the queue because apparently they're encouraging people to be self-employed. I know people that I'm supporting that have been trying to get access to work in the workplace with an employer for over 2 years. And there's 55,000 people waiting for access to work. And Stephen Timms even said that they were talking about cutting access to work because when it first came out, not very many people knew about it. And then it got publicised, and then they realised they were spending an awful lot of money in helping people in work. So the constant rhetoric that comes out from them and listening to every single minister that goes out there on the rounds is, we want to help these people get into work. We know they can work. And it's like, but there's so many of us who can't. And you're not taking any notice of us. You're just blocking us out and then saying that you're going to cut limited capability to work and all the rest of it, then that's worth £60 a week to us. So we lose that, and then they decide to start downgrading PIP as well. And people, I don't think people really understand how tough this is going to be for so many people. And I've got people every day telling me they're going to unalive themselves. And I know that's not being dramatic in any way, shape or form. this is exactly what people are saying to me, and it's horrific. And they just do not appreciate what it's like to live as disabled people. You know, people like me who've worked for 35 years of their life and then get diagnosed with MS, and it goes, thanks. Anyway, I've said enough.
Thanks, Rachel. And I think the point that in the article that I put in the chat from Open Democracy is that politicians don't actually understand how the welfare system works at present, despite the fact that they want to change it. So I'd like to just have 2 more speakers and then finish the meeting. So David and then Jan. David.
Yeah, mine's going to be quite short, so I'm not going to abuse the time. But I forgot to mention, I am a trade union representative with Unison, with Hampshire local government branch, and also I'm a member of the Green Party. Just thought I'd put that out there for transparency. But I've got a couple of questions for Simon. I don't know if there's time for him to answer them. If not, that's okay. Could he explain more about Providers United? Because I've got a suspicion that my employer, or who my employer is a member of, which is Avenues, I think Avenues is part of the Providers United, because they have a petition up on their website for people to sign out national insurance rise. And also, could he say again what the proportion of GDP is spent on social care that he mentioned earlier in his speech? Because I didn't catch that. That's it.
I put a link into the Providers Unite campaign. I don't know anything much about it, David, but I just thought symbolically it is exactly what you describe, and I just think it's not going to work. And so people need to think differently about how we campaign in social care. But I obviously support what we're doing here. I think it's very simple. 2% of GDP in 2009, 2010 even, and then 1% of GDP. So it's a 50% cut in real terms. So GDP measuring the economic activity of the whole economy. So, often that's not often the figures portrayed, because the figures portrayed don't take account of inflation and economic growth. But that's the most real world figure, because it's basically saying, as a percentage of the whole economy, it's been cut in half, from 2% to 1% in 15 years. Massive.
Thanks very much for just clarifying that, Simon. And I think the Providers Unite demonstration, I think the only demand was give us more money because we're struggling financially to provide services. Jan.
Thank you, John. Just to follow on from what Rachel was saying in terms of funding and working and all of that. The structure of work now is all wrong, and that has to change. You've got employers who are ageist, disableist, and they get away with it. And there needs to be that safety net, if you, for want of a better word, for those who are unable to go into work and unable to meet the specific conditions of a workplace. So unless and until the government work fundamentally on providing proper healthcare for people, and fundamentally with employers to ensure that employment is equal right across the board, then there will be no change for those people who are desperate to get a job. We need to get rid of the gig economy, 0 hours contracts, and have proper jobs so that young people can, make a living and save and feel like they're part of, this nation, and can have aspirations as we did, And just as a last thing, anyone who is probably around 54 up to 64. These are the people that when they retire will be solely reliant on the basic state pension because they have no other means of paying into a pension pot or no occupational pension at all. So we do have to look at the structure of work, and we have to make sure that the structure of work is compatible for the workers who want to work.
Thanks very much, General. That's a good place to end, I think. So I would like to thank everyone for coming to the meeting and participating. We would like to keep in touch with you and see more of you if possible. Thanks to Lucy for setting up the meeting and managing it behind the scenes. Lucy from the Comp National team. And thanks as always to Gilda for all her work in organising. I know she'll say she wasn't the only person, but she actually keeps ESCaD going. So big thanks to her. And we will be planning another public meeting at some point. So if anyone wants to suggest a particular topic, please let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks to John for chairing, everyone for coming along. It's great. I've put the email in the chat for End Social Care Disgrace. If you want a quick response about meetings, just email our email or have a look on our website and they will get back to you. But I will do some notes for this meeting. I will send out a new newsletter. Thanks very much.